Welcome to the Story Geeks Show. On today's show, with Egyptian gods and celestials now entering the MCU alongside Eternals, I'm kind of wondering who the most powerful characters are now. And this is a standard thing we do in comic books. We talk about the most powerful characters, we make power rankings and all this kind of stuff. We're going to do that today on this show. We're also going to be reacting and digging deeper into episode 2 of Moon Knight. So it's all about the Marvel Cinematic Universe today. It's a very Marvel-centric show. And as always, we will be talking about spoilers for all of the things that we're discussing in today's show. So if you haven't seen episode 2 of Moon Knight yet, then you may want to watch that before you listen or watch this particular show. I'm Jay Sherer, co-writer of Death of a Bounty Hunter and Time Slingers. They're on the desk here beside me if you're watching. And joining me today, I'm pretty excited about this because it's been a little while since he and I have podcasted together, but he is one of the originators of the Story Geeks podcast. Mr. Daryl Smith is joining today.
What's up?
How are you, Daryl?
I'm good. Can you hear me? Tell me you can hear me.
I can hear you. You're loud and clear. You're loud and clear.
Had to do a last-minute mic switch right before, so
yeah.
We got lucky.
We're very agile on the show. We're very agile. Thanks for joining me today. It's been a long time since you and I got to chat about geek stuff.
It has. I'm glad you brought this back. It's fun to be on it again. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, you know what
you
was
deserted
happening?
us here in California. And...
I did. I left California, traveled across the entire country. Yeah, what happened was, I haven't explained this on the show yet, but just to briefly explain why I'm bringing it back is, I started concentrating on the How Stories Work with Jay Sherer channel, which is cool. I like doing that stuff, but it's so isolating that it's like stop being fun. It's like I like talking to people. Like I like having a conversation with other people about like what's going on. So I was like, I got to bring it back and like talk to my friends. So thanks for being willing to join me on the show.
Totally.
Now you've seen episode 2 of Moon Knight.
I have, yes.
We're going to get into that. And we're going to actually start there because we're going to talk about the Marvel Power Rankings too. And I had to have somebody on who really knows the Marvel Power. I started looking it up. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Don't set me up like that.
Well, you at least know it way better than I do. So,
well, here's the thing. The farther the MCU goes, the less reliable I am as a source. Because I grew up reading DC comics. You can see all this stuff behind me. This is mostly DC comics. I got a little section of Marvel over here. But so the deeper these movies go into the Marvel universe, the more useless I become. But I'm going to do my best.
Yeah, you're going to do a great job. You're going to do way better than I would do. But we're going to start with Moon Knight. And just really quickly, before I get into the questions with Moon Knight, how have you been enjoying it? Because I've already talked about how I enjoyed it. But what did you think of episode 2? What did you think of episode 1? Like, what do you think of the series in general?
I love it. I think it's great. I really, really liked episode 1. I think that's one of the strongest first episodes of any show I've ever seen. Which I think I watched a little bit of you and Josh from earlier in the week, and I think he had a similar thing to say. But I thought that first episode was fantastic. The second one, I really loved it too. I can tell that now it's getting to the point where we need to learn more and things are going to start getting more revealed. So the mystery is gone, but we don't know everything yet. So, that one was like maybe like a 10, 2 was like maybe like a 9, but it's great.
Yeah.
So
I agree. I also didn't like episode 2 as much as I liked episode 1, but I mean, it was very much like you're saying, it's like a transitory episode. Is that even a word? It's like a transition episode, right? Like we're getting somewhere, but we're going there kind of slowly, and we needed to have an action sequence, and we needed to reveal, the other costume, you know what I mean? The kind of goofy costume where he has he looks like a stage performer of some kind.
And Oscar Isaac is fantastic.
Oh, he's amazing. He's amazing.
So good.
He's amazing.
This is going to wipe away all thoughts of X-Men Apocalypse, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. Which, by the way, he was not terrible in, but it had massive problems.
Everything was terrible.
Yeah. It was an odd film. So before we dive into episode 2 and get too far into that, you had told me before we were going to podcast, because I invited you a couple weeks back, and you said, hey, you might want to check out Jeff Lemire's run on Moon Knight, which is pretty recent. I believe it's in the last few years. And
within the last 5 or 6, maybe something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And actually, I think it was on the Empire podcast. So shout out to our friends at Empire, who we haven't had a chance to talk to in a long time. It'd be really great to
Well,
talk
now
to
that you
them.
brought this back, you know.
I know we're gonna have to invite them on again. If we're gonna talk to the Empire folks, then I'm bringing you back on to talk to them with me.
Yeah, you are.
But I believe it was on Empire. They were talking to the creator, and the creator referenced Lemire's run as influential to this particular series, because my understanding, and this is the question I'm going to turn on you, is like, what comics should people read related to Moon Knight? Because it sounds like, he was a character that was introduced in a werewolf comic, as like a somebody who was going to battle werewolf, and then apparently, based on what I understand, where I can gather, he's taken on all these different kinds of characterizations before he hit the Lemire run, and that's kind of a more specific thing that now Marvel's kind of saying is part of the MCU. So you've read the Lemire run. Tell me about Moon Knight from the comics.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I will say the Lemire run is out there. It's weird, and which is why I'm having a hard time remembering a good portion of it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of comic writers who write stuff that's like really heady and really complicated, and it's brilliant. I mean, Tom King did that with Mr. Miracle and with some other characters, and Jonathan Hickman's doing it with the X-Men, and so there's lots of stuff out there that is brilliant and super creative. I don't know if my attention span is just too short, or if I don't know what it is, but I have a hard time with those stories that get so complex.
Yeah.
And I think this was one of those. So I don't remember a whole lot from it, and I had never read any Moon Knight before that.
Yeah.
I know there are lots of different runs. I know there's lots of really, really good writers that have taken on Moon Knight over the years. So a quick Google will help anybody find those. But yeah, the Lemire run, I'm pretty sure is so in this second. Can we talk spoilers already?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the second episode, you see this new incarnation of the Moon Knight suit, right?
Right.
The one that's like the nice suit and tie and stuff like that.
That's like Steven's version of Moon Knight.
Exactly. I'm pretty sure that's straight out of the Lemire run.
Oh,
in fact, I seem to remember when the trailers came out and that was in it, the artist that designed that look was posting online saying like, I can't believe they used my look in the show. I'm so excited, and stuff like
That's
that.
Cool. That's cool.
So the Lemire run was definitely very multiple personality based.
Yeah.
The look of the Egyptian gods seems pretty similar. It was very trippy, at times very hard to understand what was going on. The TV show seems way more accessible than the run was, but
yeah,
I can see it in there for sure.
So far, that's been pretty true of the entire MCU, right? Like the MCU takes some things that could, like even the Infinity Gauntlet series is way trippier and way more out there. Yeah, there you go. You got the prop. It's way more out there than the actual Marvel films end up.
Oh yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and it's all based on, like, for those who haven't read it, this is not a major spoiler because it's in the very beginning of the series, but it's all based on the fact that like Thanos is trying to become powerful so that he can get Death to love him.
Yeah, Death is a female entity.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a bizarre deal. So Lemire's run is a good run to read if you want to know what's influencing where the MCU is taking the character of Moon Knight. But
definitely, and I know. So there's one run, I can't tell you who wrote it. I wish I could. I wish I was a better Marvel fan, but I do know who drew it. There's an artist named David Fincher, and the way that he draws not David Fincher. Sorry, it's
a director.
A director.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
We'll pretend his name is David Fincher.
Oh, Finch. It's Finch, not Fincher. Finch.
Okay.
But anyway, his art is fantastic. The way he draws Moon Knight is amazing. But there's been lots of runs, so.
It did really feel like this wasn't one of the questions I had for you, but it did really feel like the one chase sequence when Mark Spector takes over Moon Knight from Steven and he runs along the rooftops. That did feel like right out of a comic book. Like it looked like it was like a panel for panel shots. I did really enjoy that because I think that was the action sequence, the big action sequence in episode 1 that I didn't really enjoy because I thought that the CG on some of the cars was kind of funky, was the whole chase scene,
That was one of
Um,
those ones too that I have a hard time with action scenes that are just a little bit beyond the realm of believability. And I
yeah.
know that sounds crazy when we're talking about Marvel movies, but there is a line, like there's a line at which you're like, well, okay, that van should not be able to maneuver like that, and he should have fallen off that road 9 times. And
Yeah. Especially when he's switching back and forth between profiles, and it's like, well, you don't do that very fast. You
yeah,
wouldn't know that the turn is coming up. And there's
yeah,
one point in time where there's one of the cars chasing him, like literally drives off the cliff for no apparent reason.
yeah.
Like we don't know why it
Just
happens.
so we know
Just,
there's a clip there. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I thought that was really funny. But anyways, that sequence I thought was, it was fun, but it was not my favorite kind of action. But this sequence where Mark basically runs away from the jackal and he's running along the top of the building, I thought that was a beautiful sequence. I really, really enjoyed that.
I love the one in the second episode where he's in the storage facility.
Oh yeah, that
That
was
one
awesome
was
too.
crazy.
Yeah, that one's awesome too. I think the horror vibes we're getting from Moon Knight are really strong, but they're not so overly strong that it's inaccessible to a general audience.
Yeah.
Um, So talk to me about this because where do you think that Moon Knight will fit with the rest of the MCU? Because what we know about the MCU is they like to introduce us to a character. Now they've reversed this a little bit because in the movies they introduce characters and they spun off into TV shows. But this is going back to like phase one where we get phase 1 and 2 where we get introduced to a character that we don't really know and then not a lot of people have read, and then that character is then hopefully incorporated into the rest of the MCU. So how do you think Moon Knight gets connected to the rest of the MCU? We know we have the Black Knight series coming out, right? That's Kit Harington's character that he's going to be
Mhm.
playing. So where does Moon Knight come in? Is he gonna be part of this whole thing, or is he gonna be like, this is a one-off?
I don't know. I mean, Moon Knight is the very first title character to be introduced into the MCU via a Disney Plus show.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
that's a first. So I don't know. I mean, in some sense, they kind of don't have to connect it, right? I mean,
True.
the larger this gets, the more impossible it gets to keep it all together.
Right.
And so I don't know, and I've said this before, but in a lot of ways, I think we got our big shared universe payoff in Avengers Endgame, and
Right.
we may not get something like that again. They may not be building towards something like
Yeah.
that. So I don't know. There certainly seems to be a lot of Doctor Strange vibes in Moon
Yeah.
Knight. Like you'd think
That's
he
true.
could come into that, and I know I've heard rumblings of Midnight Suns, which is some sort of Marvel team. There's a video game coming out about it. There's some sort of
Huh?
Marvel team that has like these darker, sort of nocturnally characters like
Mm.
Blade and I think Wolverine's one of them. I don't know. Again, I'm
Oh, that'd be cool.
sorry, Marvel fans. I wish I was a better representative for you, but
No, you're good. Um,
so yeah, I don't know. And I think historically, Moon Knight has been in and out of things like the Avengers and stuff like that in the comics, but I don't know. I don't know how it'll integrate,
I
but I
would
would be surprised if we're building towards some huge end game-ish. Let's get everybody in one movie again. I don't think that's ever going to happen again.
That'd be really difficult to do, and I've always complained about this, and this is one of the reasons why I've been a bigger individual series run fan of DC. And I'm not a big comics guy, but that's kind of like my vibe. I don't like as much these giant like add everybody in, like add every single character in. It's because it's like I get lost and all that.
Yeah,
But what I do think would be really cool is I do think it would be cool to take some of the what you'd call like C level characters, and Moon Knight probably is. They're making him into a B level character, but historically he's probably been C level character. It'd be cool to take some of these C level characters, like for example, I don't know if what's his name, U.S. Agent or whatever, the guy from Falcon and
hmm
Winter Soldier. Take
yeah,
him, put him in a series with Moon Knight. Take somebody from put. I mean, Daredevil's more A level, but put Daredevil in a series with these guys, like because these kind of shows have had very grounded city vibes, even though like there's Egyptian gods, they still have like the city is like a part of the story, and his interaction in the city is part of the story. Moon Knight may go beyond that because obviously at the end of episode 2 we're seeing him in Egypt.
yeah.
But I kind of think that these characters would work well in the same world. in the same series. I don't think it makes as much sense to like all of a sudden stick Captain America in here, right? Like that seems like a big disconnect, right? So
I will say, I mean, yeah, it does seem like Marvel loves to build towards things, and
yeah,
obviously they're still pushing the interconnected thing. You talk about somebody like U.S. Agent John Walker is his name in the
yeah,
comic world. If you've read the comics, and even as a casual Marvel fan as I am, I know that John Walker is a part of this version of something they could be building called the Thunderbolts or the Dark Avengers, which is basically like
mm,
these sort of uh, anti-hero-ish characters coming together to form sort of a questionable,
yeah,
almost villainistic version of the Avengers. So that's him. That's Yelena Belova, who is Black Widow's sister.
yeah.
Um, Thunderbolt Ross, who in the comics is actually the Red Hulk, but I don't know if we're going to get that because William Hurt unfortunately passed away
Oh, that's
recently.
right.
So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they may not go down that road. Um, so there's a handful of those characters, and it certainly seems like they're doing that.
That's
What I
cool.
like about Moon Knight is there's no easy way to see what they're doing. And I
Right.
kind of like that. I kind of like that they have a character that they can just focus on that character. I mean, sure, there's the possibility that they can incorporate him, and it'd be
Yeah.
fun if they do, but his story is not dependent on that being his future, if you know what
Yes.
I mean. So,
Yes. Yeah.
and then to put somebody as good as Oscar Isaac right in the middle of it,
I know he's so good.
it's
It's amazing.
exciting.
He's really amazing. All right, so with that kind of stuff out of the way, if you want to read, if you want to go in and see where does Moon Knight fit in the MCU, we don't know yet, but we do know that Lemire's run is something you can read if you want to see what influenced this series. Now we're going to go into full Story Geeks mode, and I'm going to ask you these crazy deep questions, and there's several of them that came up last night. I'm going to start with one of
I'm
them, and that can maybe
wholly
lead us.
unprepared for them, so
Yeah, well,
I don't even think I know what they are. You didn't send them to me.
no, I didn't
So,
because there was such a fast turnaround time for
yeah.
this that I wasn't able to send it as early as I usually do. But it's okay because this can be a full discussion. There's so many things that were said in this show that are interesting thematically, philosophically, and even spiritually that I think we have to address them. So in episode 2, we learn that Amit and Khonshu do have a similar goal. As Egyptian gods, they do have a similar goal. We also did learn that Khonshu was basically exiled from the group of gods. I don't know if they're going to call that the Ennead. They didn't call it that in episode 2, but Khonshu was apparently exiled for some reason that we don't know. But both of them want to punish the unjust. Both of them want to punish the unjust. Amit and her avatar, who's Arthur Harrow, who by the way used to be Khonshu's avatar, so he's kind of
Yeah.
like he's kind of just cruising around to different Egyptian gods being their avatars. Amit
As
and
Ethan Hawke does.
as Ethan Hawke, yeah, exactly. In his personal life, I think
Yeah.
he said that publicly. He hasn't said that publicly. Amit and Arthur want to remove. This is what he actually says: remove people's choices by preventing them from choosing evil. So I'm going to circle back around to that because that in and of itself is fascinating. That's not my question actually yet. Because Khonshu then wants to punish people after they've committed an evil act. And then Stephen asks this really fascinating question. And this is what I want to get further into. Because he says, well, what about innocent people? And I find that question really, really interesting because when it comes to judgment from spiritual entities, because these are Egyptian gods, once worshipped by humans, maybe still worshipped by some humans, when gods are judging humans, the question is, Daryl, who is innocent? Who's innocent? What does that even mean? What does the concept of innocence mean when you think about like Amit killing people and Khonshu killing people? What is innocence? What does that entail? What does that mean? Like, how should we think about innocence?
I mean, it seems like it would have to be perfection, right?
Mm,
Because you have one God who's punishing what you've already done, and
mhm,
one God who is punishing you for anything you're gonna do.
right.
It certainly doesn't seem like Ahmet has a scale, right? Like something is evil enough. Like if you're gonna kill somebody, then I'll go ahead and get rid of you now.
Right.
If you're gonna cheat on your taxes, maybe I'll let that go. But it doesn't seem like there's a scale. So it seems like the only way to be innocent is to be perfect.
mm, mm.
which is not a thing.
Well, that's what I find so interesting, because even as Steven asked the question, he said, like, well, what about babies? Like, you gonna kill babies? And I think it's setting up an interesting philosophical conflict. And I say that I say that because we can pretty much tell that Amit lives in the world of what I would call fantasy. It is a world that assumes that we could create heaven on earth and that a utopia is possible, right? This is like as if we could if we could only eliminate all the evil people, then there would be heaven, because then there wouldn't be any evil people. But the first question I'd have to ask is like, well, what is innocence in your eyes? Because like you said, that doesn't seem to be a definition. So then I'm wondering, like, well, what if we just have a difference of opinion, right? Like, what if there's something that's kind of minor? My wife and I were talking about this the other day, and this is something that people will take two sides on listening to this podcast. We're driving along, and there's a lady driving next to us who had her little dog, on her lap. And my wife said, oh, I hate it when people do that. The dog is really cute and is looking out the window, but I hate it when people do that because it's so unsafe for the dog. Like, because if you get in a car accident, dog's probably dead, right? And I thought to myself, I made it. Of course, this is what I do. I go, yeah. So, interesting question. Is that a sin? Right? Like, is it a sin to put your dog on your lap, knowing that because the dog is comforting you, so you feel good about the dog being on your lap, but objectively, we know it's more dangerous to do. I feel good about responding to a text while I'm driving, but we know objectively it's not good to respond to text while you're driving, because you might kill somebody else. And so she was kind of like, well, I don't know if it's a sin, right? Like, is it what? So this lady has an opinion. I want my dog on my lap. We have an opinion. You shouldn't have your dog on your lap. Does Amit say, oh yeah, well, I side with the lady driving the car, so Jay and Jessica, you're actually in the wrong, so you're going down? I mean, how would you even begin? So what I'm basically asking is, and I think what you alluded to is, we don't know what Amit's actual moral standard even is.
Yeah.
It's
And what's
totally
the point
puzzling.
too?
Yeah.
What's the point? Because so far, and I'm assuming, I'm hoping that Moon Knight, whether it's Stephen Grant or Mark Spector or whoever it turns out to be,
Yeah.
will be some sort of the vessel for this in the show. But so far, it's just some nebulous version of right, an absolute version of wrong,
Right.
and no way to travel between the two. There's no way. There's no way to improve. There's no redemption. There's no sanctification.
Yep.
There's no way to get yourself off of Ahmet's naughty list or Khonshu's naughty list. You know what I mean? Like, you're either going to die after you do it, or you're going to die before you do it. Either way, you suck and you're going to get punished for it.
Right.
So, how do you grow beyond that? There's got to be something. Like, why does that exist if not to make everything better overall? You know what I mean?
Well, and that's an even more fascinating question, because what they're kind of showing you in the show, and I think that there's a dark underbelly that they have not revealed yet. But what they're kind of showing you in the show is that Amit's version is actually seemingly a little bit better for people than so far, because I think they're going to reveal something else soon, and I'll talk about what that I think they're going to do. But Amit's version, through Arthur, they live in a cool little commune, man. Like, all those people are supposedly never going to do anything bad in the future, and that little commune is pretty nice. Now, I think there's a dark side to that. I'll get into that in a minute. But you'll notice that Mark Spector, on the other hand, is not because of his multiple, I don't know what the technical term is, not multiple personality disorder or whatever it's called, right?
Dissociative disorder.
Yeah, dissociative. Thank you. Yeah. But you can tell Mark is suffering, not necessarily from that, but from the fact that he's having to work for Khonshu. He does not want Layla to work for Khonshu, so he doesn't believe Khonshu is 100% good, and he flipped out on Steven in the courtyard when Steven was talking to him through the mirror. To the point where you go, well, this guy's not doing well, right? Like, he feels like he has to do something on behalf of Khonshu. Khonshu actually says to him, "You think you own this body? It belongs to me." So Mark definitely feels like he is possessed to the point where he has to do things against his will. Steven for sure feels like he has to do things against his will. And I think that the dark underside of the Amit because right now I can't find a reason why Amit is technically wrong, besides it seems really creepy. And I think it's going to be that they're actually mind controlling those people to prevent them from doing evil. I think it's going to be, because you notice that
there's got to be something there.
Yeah, because every single person got up and like acted like they were like, oh great, something's gonna happen, right? Like, but they all did so like in unison, like they kind of move in unison, which kind of tells me like that they may be even having some possession issues from Amit's side, or at least that Arthur is kind of influencing them in some way. So going back to what you said, innocence seems like it must be perfection, and if it's not, then who gets to decide? Who gets to decide whose version of morality is best? And how would you, so as we watch these kind of shows, they're usually dealing with some sort of value system, right? Like this is what superheroes deal with all the time. You and I have talked about this a lot. And you and I have even come up with like what the definition of a hero is and what the definition of a villain is. And we've talked a lot about that on the show. But when you think about like a moral standard that these gods could be trying to uphold, in your mind, like what about that moral standard should we be paying attention to in the show? Like what are some of the things that you would say are associated with a high moral standard that you and I and most people would agree is a good high moral standard?
It's hard to know because I don't even feel like we know what people are being punished for. Like there was that old lady, right? That in the first episode that Harrow, he read her and then he killed her. We don't know why. He didn't say what she was going to do.
Right.
That was going to qualify her as evil. And also, by the way, how did she live so long before doing something that counts as evil? I mean, she wasn't young. But anyway, that's beside the point.
Right.
So that's the thing. I don't know. I don't know what those standards are because we don't really get those answers. I think what's interesting about it is there's going to have to be some version of redemption brought into this to help make sense of it. Because otherwise I just don't understand why it's happening. You know what I mean? Like,
totally.
Like it seems like that Stephen Grant is sort of he's crazy. They want us to believe that he's crazy and this stuff is, his brain is broken and stuff like that. But really, if you look at it, he's kind of the only one that's not crazy, right? Like he's the only one that sees the whole and knows that, wait a minute, this is stupid. Like, why are we doing all this? Like, what about the chance for people to get better?
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
And I refuse. That sounds harsh. I don't think this is the kind of show that's going to overlook that. You know what I mean?
Totally.
I think the quality of this is going to bring that in eventually. This isn't the Batman. I don't think they're going to completely overlook redemption and just talk about vengeance for 3 hours. Sorry.
No, you got to do it. You got to do it. Well, I did think it was interesting that this show is dealing with vengeance and that movie was dealing with vengeance as well. I thought that was an interesting, like, what about our culture is feeling like vengeance is something that we need to address and at this point in time. And I think it's important because I think that what the Batman was saying was we see the genuine. I mean, Batman is you cannot convince me otherwise that Batman was trying to say that the January 6th rioters were essentially Riddler's followers. Obviously, different things going on. I don't think the January 6th rioters were trying to kill people, although they very much threatened some of the politicians. But it was the end goal was kind of like, look, vengeance isn't the way we should behave. Like vengeance isn't the value system that we all think would be better. And I do think that's a message that we need because I mean, like, even when you see someone that has been as respected culturally speaking in America as Will Smith slap somebody on the face in the Oscars, you'd go, dude, vengeance isn't just like you can't just do vengeance whenever you want. You can't just get vengeance whenever you want to. Like, what are we doing here? You know? So I think you're right. I think that they need to solve. I think Khonshu is definitely not good. Even when he says, you think you own this body, but it belongs to me. Even when he says that, it's like that is not something that we are going to as humans say, oh, wait a minute. You're saying someone owns someone else's body? Like we have an inherent reaction of like, that's not right. Right. And I think this is what's really fascinating about being a human being is that, like, I was talking about this a little bit with Josh, and you and I are more aligned on our spiritual perspectives than Josh and I would be, right? Because he's more of a secular humanist, like we talked about on the show. I'm a Christ follower. You're a Christ follower. So when I look at these things, I instantly ask myself, like, what value system is it that Khonshu believes he can stand for? What value system is it that Amit thinks that she can stand for? And then how does that match up against what my value system would be, right?
Yeah. Well,
So
that's the weird thing about gods in the
yeah,
Marvel universe. And I think in the DC universe too, any of these things is it seems like gods are all powerful, right? And they can do all
right.
these things. We'll talk about that more later on, but they have all of this power and they create things and they're at the center of creation and there's all these things they can do and they're absolute,
Yeah.
but they have zero nuance. Like all of the
Right.
nuance comes from humanity.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
and I think, um, you know, God, as you and I believe in him,
Hmm.
is way more nuanced than we will ever be, you
Ah.
know? Or
Mm.
he understands more nuance than we ever will.
Mm.
Like he's more absolute, he's perfect. We're not. Like we screw up, he doesn't screw up. He's better than we are, but I don't think he is oblivious to
Mm.
the nuance that comes with trying to accept his gift and lived by the standards that he sets forth. Like he
Yeah.
understands what that looks like for us. Whereas gods in these comics and stuff like that, it seems like they have something to learn from humanity.
Right.
Which so it's a weird. I don't know if that answers your question. Honestly, don't remember what your question was. But
Well, at this point, we're off the questions, and we're just talking about this
yeah,
concept because I think, you're getting at a concept that I think is really fascinating, and that is that uh, when we see the stories of the Egyptian gods, which was a major spiritual belief system, we're talking like 2000 BC and even further back. Um, I'm not a historian, so don't quote me on that. Go look it up if you want to know the exact time frame. But I'm just giving you context. Is like this goes way, way back in that time frame. Whether and then we saw like the Norse gods, which Thor is going to be a Norse god, the representative of a Norse god eventually. Um, when we see those gods are actually, I'm going to say they're written. Somebody might believe that they're actually gods that exist. I'm going to say that they're written. I'm going to say that these are not true gods, that they are written by human beings to understand the world a little bit better. That's what it feels like to me. And why does it
yeah,
feel like that to me? It feels like that to me because they're very human behaving, right? Like they act like humans. They get in affairs with each other. Like if you go read about the Egyptian gods, definitely that society was trying to tell itself things about what it should be and how it should be and how they should behave, which are generally speaking what gods do, right? They tell us like what moral systems we should think about and adhere to. And these gods seem very human in their behavior. They don't seem like for example, I think you and I would say that there's nuance, like you said, but there's not a moral quandary about like what God should do or he shouldn't do.
right, right.
But Khonshu is like, he seems like he might be wrestling with what he should do or shouldn't do. Like, and Amit too, like they seem like they have different perspectives and they're both gods. So
Or even if they're not wrestling with it, they have no regard for how it affects their subjects or their
correct.
people, which
Correct.
is completely antithetical to God as we believe in him. Like,
Yeah.
yes, he's absolute. Yes, he has standards. Yes, he's set apart. Um, but the gospel story, right?
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
made a gigantic sacrifice to create a way for us to still have access to his goodness.
Exactly. Well, and to that point too, like if you start to look at so what I would argue is, and this is why I think we as humans reject the idea that Amit's view is a good idea, is that if those people end up being highly controlled, then yes, they can prevent the ability of doing evil. If Amit, let's just say Amit, just assume for a second that Amit had a perfect idea of how human beings should behave, because you and I would say we believe that God has a perfect way for humans to behave.
Mhm.
We would also both say that no human is capable of achieving that, right? So
Right.
so that's what we would say. But let's just say for a second that Amit had the same perspective as what we believe God has, which is a perfect view of how humanity should interact with each other and with him, or with, in this case, with her. Then if Amit says, I'm going to eliminate all the evil people, and anybody who I don't eliminate, I therefore have to remove the choice of them to do evil. Well, now we're going all the way back to what we would call the Garden of Eden scenario, right? And that in order for you to have free will, you sort of have to be able to do evil, right? Whether it's
Mhm.
intentional or not intentional, you
You have
have
to have
to
the
have
choice.
you have to have a choice. Otherwise, you're an automaton. You're not any different than a robot, right? And then the struggle is, how do I choose to do good? And by the way, that's not like easy, difficult. That's like nuanced levels of like, well, in this situation, do I have to behave differently than in the situation I encountered yesterday? And the truth is, you probably do have to interact differently. Um, and I think what's interesting about the Amit Khonshu scenario is that you said earlier, because you said there's no opportunity for redemption, nor is there opportunity for sanctification. Sanctification being the process of becoming a better human, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, and that's a fascinating insight, I think, because what it means is that neither Amit nor Khonshu allows for what we would say God allows for, and that is for us to be repentant and us to say, I did sin. I shouldn't have sinned. I need to make restoration with someone else because of my sin. And that's doesn't seem to be on the table with either of these two gods at this point in time.
Yeah. And if it's not, then to to quote you, what is their why? Like,
Yeah,
what's the point? Like, why are they doing what they're doing? Why are they punishing humanity? Do they care about
right.
humanity and love it to some degree so that they want it to be a certain way?
Exactly.
If that's the case, all you're doing is killing everybody. So
Yeah, yeah,
you're not improving anything. You're not giving anybody a chance to learn your ideal and come up to it. You know what I
right.
mean?
Right.
So that's missing. And
Yeah.
then it doesn't even seem like they really love humanity. Honestly, they seem pretty annoyed by humans. So
Yep.
it's
Yep.
just kind of like, what's the point? Which I think is part of what's going on in Steven's head. Is he learns more about what's going on around him. He's like,
Yes.
this is crazy.
Yes. Oh, totally agree. Totally agree.
Because I don't think Marvel, the Disney Marvel Feige machine, is going to give us a story that is 100% about vengeance
No.
with no redemption whatsoever.
No.
They're just not going to do that. I mean,
Yeah.
they gave us Bucky Barnes. They're not going to do something
Exactly,
like that.
exactly.
So
No, it seems like what it's gearing up to be. What it seems like it's gearing up to be is that this person with dissociative disorder is fighting this internal battle of like, I feel compelled to. There's a God that saved me from death, and I feel like I am compelled to, as Khonshu says, your body belongs to me, and if I don't serve him, then he's gonna get Layla, and I can't have that happen. So I have to distance myself from all of those people and follow this guy, even though I don't want to. But hopefully, he'll release me from my contract, and we can kind of just let it go at that. And what it feels like is that Steven is the part of the Mark Spector Steven individual that is basically saying there is a right way, and it's none of the ways that everybody else is talking about. And everybody may perceive me as the crazy one, but I'm technically the one that should be in control of this body because I would be doing the most righteous things with it, right?
yeah,
Um, and I think what's going to have to happen is that we feel like Steven is the weak one and that Mark is the strong one. And I think what they're basically showcasing in this show is that without Steven, Mark would be a complete psychopath and it would never things would never go the way that they should go. So that's what I'm thinking is going to happen in this show. That's the way that we're going to go is that, Steven's going to be the one that's the good guy and Mark's going to be the one that needs to learn how to adapt and they'll need to learn to work together. But any other takes on episode 2 that you want to throw out there?
I don't know. I was just thinking about the opposite of that. That's interesting that without Steven, Mark would be a psychopath. It seems like without Mark, Steven would be a pretty happy, normal dude. Like,
True. Yeah, it's true.
he would have gone on a date with a nice girl, works at a museum, seems like a nice guy. He's kind to everybody. I'm like, I don't really see what Mark brings to the table that Steven's missing. But
Yeah, I totally agree. Unless there's some sort of like,
maybe confidence or
right,
yeah.
exactly. We did get a question from a Facebook user. For some reason, StreamYard a lot of times will block Facebook user names from us unless they fill out their information or whatever. So I don't know who this is, but if you're in the chat, you can let me know who this is. But I think this is a really good question that picks up right where we're leaving off with this discussion before we transition into the next one. And it is, can you be evil if you're the only person left alive? So I'll let you answer that question first because I have a take on that. But I want to hear what you have to say. Can you be evil if you're the only person left alive?
It depends on the standard, right?
Mm,
I mean,
mm.
based on I don't even know what the standard is in this show, so it's hard to answer that.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
certainly seems like it has more to do with how you treat people. So I guess maybe in that sense, no.
Mm,
Um, in the sense of the Christian faith, I would say yes, you can
yeah,
be.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I don't know. If evil is all wrapped up in how you treat other people, then maybe even then, like just because you don't have anybody to be evil towards doesn't mean you wouldn't if you could. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I'll give you two extra answers to this because by the way, this is from Dale Wentland, our buddy.
Oh, Dale.
Yeah. In fact, Dale's going to be on this show. By the way, special preview. Dale's going to be on this show in a couple weeks. So,
Nice.
special thanks to Dale for being on the show and also for asking this question. This is a good question. So, I think the answer to this question is yes, and I'll tell you why I think it's yes. Because I don't think that imperfection. So there's two things that we need to define here. Are you evil if you make mistakes? And some people will answer that question with no, right? No, if you just make mistakes, you're just a human. Like, you're not evil, you're just a human person. I would argue that a mistake is evil because it has an effect, right? It has a rippling effect on other people that you didn't maybe intend evil, but it's a mistake to drink too much and drive. And if you kill somebody else, is that person did they not do something that was evil? Like, we would call that as evil. Maybe we wouldn't say like, oh man, they did something that we would. Now, I also believe that most evil people do things that we would also do, put in certain circumstances that we should not be in. But I think that we can be evil to the environment, right? And I think that if you're a spiritual person, you could make a very clear argument that you can be evil to God. So if you believe in God, you can be evil to God. And I think that we inherently do things that are even mistakes that we make can be evil. And I think that, like, for example, the example that I gave when we started this conversation about seeing the lady driving with the dog on her lap. Well, she's not committing that evil against another human being. Not well, evil. I mean, I don't want to label this lady. See, that sounds so harsh. But she's making a decision that's maybe not the best decision for that dog, right? And I would argue that, well, just as we should be gracious, just as we should be kind, just as we should be loving to each other, we owe that to our environment as well. We owe that to animals as well. So I don't know if there's a way to. I don't believe that there's a way to remove evil from anyone's potential future or their actual past. I don't think there's a way to remove evil from the scenario that we find ourselves in. Because I also think that you could say that even though the world is set up, this is just something that you and I probably would believe, Daryl, but maybe not everybody would believe this. The fact that there are natural disasters is to a certain extent evil. It is a result of what we would say. The way we would define this is God allows things to happen in the world, and some of the things that he allows, whether it's human caused or just a natural consequence of our entire creation being subject to sin, which you could be called evil. I think that those things, I mean, when a natural disaster kills thousands of people, that's evil, right? Like, that's not what we want to happen. That's like devastating for families. It's devastating for communities. It's devastating for us. So yeah, I think that you can be evil even if you're the only person left alive? But that's a heady question. I love that question, Dale. That's a fantastic question. All right, so let's move on from Moon Knight, which was a great discussion. Thanks everybody for listening, and thanks Daryl for joining me on that. Now, when you go online, you can find, this is a good transition because we're talking about gods. We're talking about the way that the world is set up. When you go online, you can find a bunch of things about Marvel Power Rankings. And I went through and I was looking through multiple people taking all of the characters that have ever existed in the Marvel comics and making power rankings and associating them. And I thought to myself, because this is what's happening, right? What's happening is in our world today, or in the MCU world today, as the MCU draws more characters into its fold from the comics, it starts to get very confusing as to where does everybody fit. Now, the reason why this question came up in my mind was I'm watching this show about Egyptian gods, and I'm going, does that mean that Khonshu has the same power level as Thor, or is he like above Thor, or is he below Thor? And then where do we get like Dormammu's interdimensional being? We have Celestials now that seem incredibly powerful. So basically, Daryl, what I wanted to do was I just wanted to talk through this scenario where we can say, I have 3 questions for you. I sent these to you in advance, so this is going to be a fairly open conversation. But let's start with this. Who are kind of like the bottom tier entities in the Marvel Cinematic? Who are the people that are like, okay, they're not super powered, maybe they're lower level powered if we're thinking about this?
Oh boy, there's so many qualifications to this. So like,
I know, it's not going to be perfect. So just let us say this: I would love to hear your comments in the thoughts below on this, or in the comments below, because this is going to be very complex, and we're not going to be able to do this justice. So just caveat upon caveat upon caveat. But I still want to talk about it because I think it's kind of a fascinating kind of topic as we look at like who's entering because we're gonna get Doctor Strange in the multiverse of madness, and that's gonna be bonkers. You can tell by the previews.
Mhm.
So these things are interesting to me. So what would you say? Who are some of the least powerful entities in the MCU?
So okay, a couple qualifications I guess I have to ask about
Okay.
for our purposes, for our imperfect discussion about this. Are we considering people who have no inherent power whatsoever and get their quote unquote power from tools like Iron Man, stuff like that?
So
Or
let's
does it
do.
have to be some sort of supernatural power that's within them?
Well, let's say this. Let's say that Tony Stark, and I'm not gonna. I'm gonna say this, and I don't want to follow this line of thinking because this would be way too complicated. But Tony Stark without the Iron Man suit is just a dude, right?
Yeah.
Like so, I would say that like you know, to me, there's like human level lower power, and that's like Hawkeye. He's really
Mhm.
good at what he does. But so I think that Tony Stark without the suit fits into that category, but Tony Stark with the suit probably bumps him up a little bit. So that's kind of how I would define that a little bit. Is just if we
Okay.
have this conversation.
Because if you follow that line of thinking, if you remove people who are just using tools per se,
Yeah.
you have to take Doctor Strange out of it.
Interesting.
Because in reality, he has no power. He's a normal guy who learned the mystic arts.
Hmm.
So that has 2 implications to it. One, technically, he has no power within himself.
Yeah.
And 2, that means anybody can be as powerful as Doctor Strange, which is
Yeah, that's true.
frightening.
Which crazy. Yeah.
So, but if we're not going down that rabbit hole, then yeah, I mean, I would put the lower tier as being those characters that are dependent on some sort of tool in the moment to give them their power. So your Iron Mans, your War Machines. I would even put Captain America in that
Oh, interesting.
category because it's a chemical inside of his body that makes him that way.
Mm.
I would say the same thing about Black Panther. You
Mm.
know, without the heart-shaped herb, he's just a normal dude.
Interesting.
Um, so that's kind of where my head fell on that is if you can remove from the person what makes them powerful,
Mm.
for me, they kind of fall on that lower tier.
Lowest tier, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I think that's a really good distinction to make because um it just occurs to me that like that's what makes so many of the Marvel characters inherently interesting to us is that they
Mhm.
are us, just with a slight change in their life,
Yeah.
right? Like you're this person, and then boom, this happens to you, and now you're part of the Avengers. Because even Peter Parker, right? Like even Peter Parker is not. He's a lower tiered. He doesn't inherently have that. He has to get bit by a spider before he really has those things.
Yeah, but you can't take it away from him, as far as I know. There's no way to
That's
take
true.
take Peter's power away. You can't like with Tony, you take him out of the suit, he's done.
Yeah, yeah,
With
yeah,
Steve Rogers, take the serum out of his blood, normal guy,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
you know? But, I don't think you can do that with Spider-Man, but
yeah. Maybe not.
based on
Oh,
what he does, it seems like his power is only his strength. And
mm,
well, I
mm.
guess in his ability to cling to things, but
Yeah. And depending on whether or not which one you follow, maybe shooting things out of your wrists or not, or building something
yeah,
that shoots things out of your wrists. Um, that's really interesting. Um,
I
so
sorry, I was no, go ahead.
no. I was just gonna say, like, let's go ahead and talk about what the middle tier characters
Yeah.
are then, because like obviously like what you just based on the description that we just came up with, a bunch of the lower tier characters could be considered almost approaching the middle tier when they have their accoutrement activated, right? Like but who's solidly in the middle tier because their power is innate, right?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think this is where you can put characters like the Eternals,
Ah,
um, because the Eternals, they made them seem like these all powerful, like, why didn't you help fight Thanos and all this kind of stuff.
yeah,
If you look at each individual Eternal, which, by the way, spoiler for the Eternals movie, if you have not seen it,
yeah,
okay, I gave you enough time. They're all robots. they're
yeah.
they're not even they're not even beings. They're robots in a
Oh, that's
sense.
interesting. Yeah, that's kind of
So,
true.
and they each have most of them have one power,
Yeah,
and that's it.
yeah.
So each one individually is not going to be like a top tier powered character.
Right, right. I totally
So
agree with that because I think
maybe Icarus, because he's kind of like the Marvel version of Superman, but still, I wouldn't put any of them at the top.
well, I don't think I would either. So you got the Eternals in the middle. I think I'd put Thor in the middle, right? Like any of the Norse gods they're inherently imbued with their power. They're born with their power.
Hmm.
Now, granted, Thor has Mjolnir or what is the other one? Stormbreaker.
Stormbreaker.
Yeah,
But
he
as we
has
saw in Ragnarok, he doesn't need them.
exactly,
He's still the god of thunder with or
exactly.
without those tools.
Exactly. And this is where you'd find Captain Marvel going from a lower tier, maybe even into the middle tier, if you were to give her abilities.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that middle tier makes up what I would basically call like and by the way, I saw some of the people online in their lists do really compelling arguments for like how many tiers there are and why there's this many tiers and like who falls into what tier. But see, that's for the comics. We haven't gotten into that in the MCU yet, so
Yeah.
we're still trying to figure this out because I would agree that the Eternals fit in the middle tier, Thor fits in the middle tier. Um, some of the other heroes that we talked about being in the lower tier who have the thing with them already kind of fit in the second tier. But this is where it gets interesting. Like the Egyptian gods, to me, the Egyptian gods don't inherently feel more powerful than Thor is, but they're then imbuing the characters below them, like Moon Knight, so he seems like a lower character based on the definition that we were just talking about. But the Egyptian gods seem like they're not any more powerful than the Eternals might be.
Well, as Moon Knight has shown us thus far, it doesn't seem like the Egyptian gods can do much of anything without an avatar,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
So it would seem they have some mental influence,
Right.
obviously,
Right.
which can be extremely dangerous. I mean, if there's one Eternal that's more powerful than the rest, I would probably give it to Druig because he can
Mm.
control people's minds,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
you know, thousands and thousands at a time.
Yeah.
But physically powerful, we haven't seen the Egyptian gods do anything other than control some crazy people so far.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, just because you brought him up, there are people who are now Marvel and DC characters. He's one of them, right? Like he's Joker
Sort of.
and
Yeah,
he's
he wasn't
Joker
in the
and
movie, but yeah.
yeah,
He's
sort
a
of in the end. But
deleted scene.
then you also have characters who are multiple MCU characters. So Oscar Isaac is 3 different MCU characters.
Yeah.
So it's pretty wild. It's kind of fun. We live in a bizarre world where you can say, yeah, I'm part of the DC universe and I'm part of the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about Celestials. Let's talk about Dormammu. Let's talk about Ego. I guess you could even bring in the AI that gives Captain, or that is involved in Captain Marvel's powers. Like, now those seem to me
Oh, the
like they're
Supreme Intelligence.
the Supreme Intelligence. Those seem to me like they're above the middle tier.
Yes. However,
Mm.
I think this gets back to what we were talking about with Moon Knight too.
Mm.
They all do seem to be of that physical prowess, of that level of power.
Yeah.
But they also seem to be completely hindered by whatever their context is. Like, yes,
Ah.
Celestials, they create planets, they destroy planets. Like,
Yeah.
that's insanely powerful.
Yeah.
But why? Like, what are they thinking about? Like, what's behind that? So yes, they may be all powerful, but they're also seemingly only doing it for the case of creating or destroying.
Mm.
It's so weird. It's like they're insanely powerful, but kind of stupid.
Yeah, they don't seem like
So,
they have a
which
lot of free will to do whatever they want to. They kind of just got to do
yeah, which
whatever they do.
to me, if you take seemingly limitless, we don't understand it yet levels of power
Yeah.
and pair it with somebody who struggles with things like compassion and redemption and understanding other people,
Right.
you get what is probably the most powerful being to me in the MCU, which is Wanda Maximoff.
Ah, interesting. I
That's
was
where I'm
gonna
at.
Interesting. Wanda's the most powerful being in the MCU. So here's I'm gonna go.
Potentially.
I'm gonna go. I think there might be one being that is more powerful than. Okay, so this is actually, I think
Kevin Feige.
Dale brings up a good point. It's Kevin Feige. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was Dale kind of was leading off with what I was just going to talk about, because it feels to me like Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet is whoever has the Infinity Gauntlet, but especially Thanos seems like the most powerful character in the entire MCU.
Yeah, but then again, based on what we're talking about, that actually puts Thanos way down at the bottom tier, or maybe at the second because he's super strong without the
Yeah.
Infinity Gauntlet. But again, that's a tool, right?
Right. Exactly. So this would be interesting. Is like, so because the Infinity Gauntlet by definition, like let's just take any other character and put them up against. Because Dale here says, what about Tony Stark with the Infinity Gauntlet? Wouldn't he be
Yeah,
similar?
or
And
Hulk with the Infinity Gauntlet.
yeah, exactly. And I would argue that those characters, any character given the Infinity Gauntlet, because you have omniscience, you have all power, you have the ability to change time and space. Like even Dormammu, who is annoyed by Doctor Strange, right? The Doctor Strange beats Dormammu not because he's any stronger, but because he is able to use time in a way that Dormammu is not able to overcome.
Yeah.
But Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet, it's like, you want to go back in time, bro? Let's go. We can go as far as you want. Like, he could have reversed some of the things that Doctor Strange was trying to do. So it'll be interesting to see if the MCU can, if they're going to, or even if they want to, create another powered level that is Infinity Gauntlet level power, right? Like, because that's the ultimate
Yeah.
power.
Well, it seems like Kang the Conqueror might be up
Mm,
there.
mm.
We'll see.
Yes, we're gonna have Galactus at some point too, right? Like Galactus is gonna be in the
It's
MCU.
like we'd have to. I mean, if we
Yeah.
get the Fantastic Four, we'll definitely have Galactus.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But again,
So,
Galactus is another one of those ones that has this gigantic. He's a world eater. He's got this gigantic power, and he's huge. But why? You know what I mean?
yeah. Yeah. Well, what's interesting too is we haven't seen some of the characters that are in the comics universe, because there's this inherent. This is what's really fascinating to me, is that like the MCU can kind of say, we'll bring in the Egyptian gods, and the only way that they're really truly able to do that is because we kind of don't view the Egyptian gods as being real. Like, if we're being honest with ourselves, like there's
Mhm.
might be some people that worship them, but generally in the West, and we're making these movies in the West, generally speaking, we don't believe the Egyptian gods are real. We believe they are fiction. And because of that, they can include them. Because I was just thinking about this, and we know that Captain America has a we don't know what his specific belief system is, but it's definitely Judeo-Christian leaning, as the
Yeah.
founders of America kind of leaned. So we
There's
hear
only
him
one
pray to
God, man,
God.
and he doesn't dress like that.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And that kind of viewpoint would suggest that there's a being over everything. And actually there is in the Marvel comics, because in my research I realized that there's like the one above all, right? Who's like this. I don't even know if they ever describe who he is or what he does, but it's like, you know, so but then you have all these lesser beings, and you have beings like Mephisto, which is, Mephisto is going to probably be acting a little bit more like what you'd call like the devil, right? In some ways, because Mephisto and the devil kind of go hand in hand in
Yeah,
other
yeah.
mythologies. But again, because those in the West are beliefs that like people still hold, it creates this really strange dynamic where you can't really introduce them at all, because it's like, no, that would be like too weird to introduce them. It's like, but we can take these other characters and say that they're just kind of super powered, because I think at the end of the day, this is what's interesting about mythology, is that, and this is the impetus for this conversation really, is that mythology says that the gods are intra universe. They're a part of an existing universe.
Mhm.
Whereas many religions would view God as extra universe, right? Like
And having
create
created the
having
universe.
created the universe.
Yeah.
So you immediately take that, like, that any characters that exist in this world are immediately unproportionately powered to that god, right? So you have to do this intra universe god creation, character creation, and it's very fascinating to see how the MCU is managing that overall. And
Yeah.
it's I would say overall it's pretty fun, and it's been doing, I think they've been doing a pretty good job. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's hard because if you really dig into it and really
Mhm.
look at how you would maybe approach it in real life, it's radically flawed. But
Yeah, yeah.
it's also super fun, great stuff to watch. Some of my favorite things are in the MCU. Like,
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it. But, like any universe, like it's fun to talk about this in the context of movies because this has been a problem with comics for decades. But is escalation. Like,
Mm,
it's like, well, we have this most powerful being in this story, and now we want to tell a bigger story and make an even bigger threat for our heroes. So we have to come up with something bigger, but that means we need a hero who's big enough to go against that. And it just keeps going and going and going to the point where eventually you have this gigantic mess of characters that your reader, or in this case your viewer, knows can do way more than you're showing them doing.
right.
And then suddenly you have the Superman problem, which is why it's so hard to tell a story with Superman because he should be able to pretty much do anything or
Right.
deal with anything. And it's so hard to create something that is a real problem for him,
Right.
you
Right.
know? And so
Yeah.
it's kind of the same thing in the Marvel universe. The farther they go, the more we get of this and the harder it becomes to manage. Like, I was looking at some of these same lists and some videos and stuff like that, and it's really interesting that a lot of the ones that I see that are recent will put Wanda way at the top of the list.
Uh,
But ones that came out before Endgame or before WandaVision
mhm.
would put her pretty far down the list
Yeah.
because they just hadn't introduced what she did in WandaVision yet. And
Right.
the fact that her power maybe didn't completely come from the Mind Stone. Maybe she had something in her before that, and
Right.
we don't fully understand it. And obviously, she can do insanely crazy things that we don't know yet. So
Right. Right.
that's the problem of expanding the universe is eventually it's just going to be completely unmanageable. But
Yeah.
as long as you tell fun stories and they're engaging, that's okay.
That's true. Going back to Moon Knight really quickly, I did find it very interesting that uh, one of the things that Arthur Harrow said to Stephen was he says you have a lot of chaos in you. Now, chaos is a
Hmm.
generic term, right? Like it could mean that you have dissociative disorder, and so you have lots of personalities in you, or whatever he means. But part of me thought to myself for a second, like, are they suggesting that he like there's chaos magic that is something to do
Oh yeah.
with what is going on with him? Because it would be really fascinating if that were true. Then it means that he would actually not need to rely on Khonshu. Khonshu is maybe a vehicle for him to draw on his strength, but it doesn't. If the chaos is actually in him, the chaos magic is actually in him, he could do some of those things without having Khonshu involved at all, which would be really interesting.
Another little connection like that. I don't remember if it was Khonshu or Ahmet, but
Mm,
we saw the part where one of them like hit their staff on the ground, and
yes.
Harrow was talking about how there's a little sliver of power
Yep.
in
Yep.
that staff.
It was all pink. Yeah.
It was purple,
Purple. Yeah.
like Power Stone purple. So
Exactly.
who
Exactly.
knows?
Yeah, who knows? That's really cool. Well, Daryl, I am going to talk a little bit more about the history of Death of a Bounty Hunter, but it was a pleasure to have you on the show. Let's do this again real soon. Anything now? I don't know that you're. Are you promoting anything these days?
No, no, no. I'm sort of podcast retired at this point.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah,
except
yeah, yeah.
except for you.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Um,
well, I will say that the most fun that we ever had on the podcast was when it was early on, you and me just reaching out to people we never thought would be on the show. They're coming on the show talking to us about things.
yeah.
That was all kinds of fun. So thank you for your history with the Story Geeks, and don't be a stranger. You basically have an open invitation. Anytime you want to come on the show, you just tell me and you're on.
Throw it out, I'll catch them.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Cool. Well, we'll tell the family I said hi and have a fantastic rest of your day, sir.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Bye.
Bye.
All right, so I'm going to transition now into what I'm doing on each show is on Tuesdays, I'm talking a little bit about or reading from Death of a Bounty Hunter. And then on Thursdays, I'm giving you a little bit of background into like how the story came about in the first place. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this today. Eventually, I will find the first ever script I wrote. I'll actually read some of that script to you so you can compare where Death of the Bounty Hunter is now comparative to that script. But I don't have that yet. I was able to find an old version of the script, but let me go back in history and talk a little bit about how many different versions of Death of a Bounty Hunter there are. So in 2022, Death of a Bounty Hunter has been released as it's kind of behind my microphone here if you're watching. Death of a Bounty Hunter has been released as a book, as a novel. You can purchase it on Amazon. It's about to be released as a full cast audiobook. So we have a full cast of actors acting out the different roles. It sounds very similar to an audio drama, but it's not as the difference between an audio book and an audio drama is that an audio drama is often very sound focused and you need to prompt people's minds with what sounds you produce. That's not as true with Death of a Bounty Hunter. We have actors that are you hear their internal monologue. So instead of saying like instead of having a door noise when he enters the room, he just tells you he enters the room, right? And I prefer that from a stylistic perspective, and so that's why we went in that direction. But yeah, I'm going to go back to like all the iterations of what Death of a Bounty Hunter used to be, and hopefully, at some point in time, I'll actually showcase those to you on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. But the first iteration of Death of a Bounty Hunter came because I was part of a screenwriting contest, and in the screenwriting contest, they gave us basically a prompt. I believe that prompt was, I can't remember the exact. It was a verse from the Bible. The prompt was a verse from the Bible, and basically, what the contest wanted you to do is that the contest wanted you to create a story around the philosophical premise of that particular verse. And that particular verse was if you're going to give a gift at the altar, so this is a gift to God that you're laying forth at an altar, then you should first go and be reconciled to your human that you offended, a human that you offended. So be reconciled first before you try to get reconciliation with God. And the basic question there is like, why would that be the case, right? Why would we think that we would need reconciliation with fellow humans before we would ask it from God? Interesting premise to deal with, right? And so what that morphed into was I wrote a short film, and the short film was about a cowboy who had done something wrong and then was thinking to himself like, I'm going to try and escape from this scenario. And the concept I was asking in my head, and somebody asked me about this on Twitter yesterday, and so I'll tell you my philosophy for writing stories like this. And this comes from hearing other people talk about it too. So this is not just my original theory, but realizing that Ryan Johnson and Scott Derrickson had some wisdom to share on this specific topic. And that was related to, it's better to not assume that you know the answer when you start writing. I'm paraphrasing, right? They didn't say this exactly, but it's better to actually use your writing process as a means by which to explore whether or not something could be true, as opposed to assuming you know what's true and just writing that, because then you won't learn all of the nuances that make a story more realistic to the shared human experience. And so that was very true about this, because I had to ask myself, like, why would this spiritual book say you must be reconciled to your fellow humans before you're reconciled to God? Like, why would that be a thing? Because a lot of times you'll hear from people like, only God can judge me, almost like I don't need to be reconciled to you because I can do whatever I want to because I'm reconciled to God. But that's not what this verse is saying, right? This verse is saying, no, 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 no. Before you think before you assume you can just get forgiveness from God, not that it's saying you can't, but it's also saying, but you need to, like, there's an important part of forgiveness that is being forgiven. And so I had to ask myself, like, why that is. And so what Death of a Bounty Hunter started to become over time, as I went through a script version. I turned that script into a prose short story. That prose short story became a different prose short story. I actually released that story on Amazon for sale. Got feedback on it. Basically, they told me it's a weird Western, but it could be a lot weirder. So Nathan and I went back to the drawing board and we're like, let's make it weirder. Let's make it super weird. And so we started adding all this like these bizarre qualities to it. And then eventually we got over to Death of a Bounty Hunter. So over the course of this series, I'll be talking a little bit about all of those steps and how those came about. But back to the premise I was exploring has never changed. And it is this concept of when we do things that hurt other people, we tend to want to have two responses that are not the ideal responses, in my opinion. This is coming from me trying to explore this issue in greater depth, and maybe you have a different take on it, and I'd love to hear your take on it. So let me know if you have a different take. But one of the two responses I think we tend to have is we prefer to justify our behavior and say, no, 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 I really wasn't in the wrong, or like I was justified for being in the wrong because this person did this to me, or that person did this to me, or whatever. So we either try to justify our behavior, or we try and avoid the consequences of the behavior. We try to avoid the person that we maybe hurt, that we may be injured. We try and say, like, I'm just going to remove myself from that situation. Now, why would the spiritual book talk about this issue as if that were not the way to go? As if it were like, no, you should go to the person. You should go back to the person. And I thought a lot about that as I was creating this story, which is, by the way, a crazy story. There's tons of action in it, and there's a guy with a Gatling gun for an arm. But this is at the heart of it, right? I started thinking about that thematically, and I started thinking, well, what happens to us? Not just the other person that we injured, but what happens to us when we don't go to that person? And the truth is that there's always going to be something that's lingering if we don't go to the person. There's always going to be this like disconnect between us and them. And that's a messy process. But I think that if we run away from it and assume that it never happened, then we miss the opportunity for engagement. We miss the opportunity to reconnect. We miss the opportunity to reconcile with that other human being. And that eats away at us over time. And then we can justify it ourselves. We can justify it. And by the way, I've justified a ton of things that I've done over the years that that I probably should not have done. Probably should have reconciled in some way, shape, or form, but I justified. Like, oh, I should have. That person was being a jerk, so it's okay that I did whatever I did. And so I think that ultimately, what I came to believe as I tried to explore the story was that running hurts us, justifying ourselves hurts us, as much as it does anybody else or the community that we're involved in. That's kind of what I've aligned with in my thinking. And I've done that because as I tested this with the character in the story, the main character is Flint. By the way, main character named Flint from the very first time I ever picked up anything to start writing the story. It's always been about Flint. Same character. Some of the other characters' names have changed drastically, and I'll talk about that in later episodes too. But in this book, the question was about what happens if we don't reconcile to other people and just assume that we can reconcile to God. Because I do think that from a spiritual perspective, you can reconcile to God anytime. You don't need to go to a person to be reconciled to God. But what that book is saying, what that passage is saying is it's the best way to do it. You should go to the person first because you get a chance to actually build a relationship back up, and it helps you because the gap that you feel like you created with that person needs to be resolved essentially. And Dale brings up a really good point here too. Here, I can show the comment too. I forgot to show his other ones. There is no path to forgiveness if you run away from conflict. And that's exactly right. If you run away from conflict, if you take this as your, by the way, Dale Wentland is the guy here who's commenting. If you run from a thing or if you justify yourself, then there will never be a shared human connection. This is why this is why we were talking about war on Tuesday. War is top of mind because we have what's going on in Russia and the Ukraine. And justifying your behavior and not going to the people who you believe are doing wrong is what results in wars. If you think about it, that is the ultimate. It's the ultimate thing, right? Like, no, these people must be eradicated. I refuse. I am justifying my own behavior, and there can be no other consequence except to eradicate these people. And now you get into the same questions we were asking with Moon Knight, right? Like, who says you get to eradicate people, and who says you're not guilty of some crime that you should be eradicated for? So that's a little bit of a background premise as to how Death of a Bounty Hunter came out. It came from this contest, this screenwriting contest that I did. That script made the top 10, by the way. The original script for Death of a Bounty Hunter, it was not called that back then. It was called the Silver Cross, was what it was called back then. Which I will read that to you on a future episode because I'd love to have you see the building blocks of what became Death of a Bounty Hunter. But in the meantime, you can buy Death of a Bounty Hunter on Amazon right now. And then pretty soon we will have the full cast audiobook. I'm in the final editing process right now. Like literally, Isadora Nieves is our sound engineer. I'm going to give him the final edits this week. Hopefully I can finish it this week. And then he's going to take those files, give them back to me, and I'm going to post them up onto SCHECK, which is basically allows us to put it on Audible, and it'll be on Audible as well, which is really cool. So that is it for today's show. Special thanks to Dale for hanging out with us. Special thanks to Daryl Smith for hanging out with me as well and talking about Moon Knight and the MCU and the power rankings of the MCU in general. Just remember, all new episodes will be coming out on Tuesday and Thursday throughout April and May. I was just talking to a really amazing podcast producer at one of the top podcasts in the entire world. One of the top 50 podcasts. The executive producer was willing to talk to me. And one of the things she was telling me was that consistency is really, really important. And I go, yeah, that's totally true. So maybe I'll go beyond April and May doing the 2 episodes a week. I'll try my best. But in April and May, for sure, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, which means if you're on the Pacific Coast, that's a 10 a.m. start. And if you're on the East Coast, it's a 1 a.m. or the 1 p.m. start. And it'd be really fun to keep talking about these things. Next Tuesday, Michael Gordon, the co-host of the ESO podcast, will be joining me to talk about episode 1 of Tokyo Vice. It's something that I really want to get into. In fact, I think that when Dale joins me later in the month, we're going to be talking about Tokyo Vice as well, one of the future episodes. So we're going to be digging deeper into that. And then also, I think Mike and I will talk a little bit more on Tuesday about Death on the Nile, which came out. If you didn't know, Death on the Nile came out on HBO Max. So you can now watch Death on the Nile on HBO Max. So listen to that or watch that movie before you listen on Tuesday, because we'll probably get into some spoilers there. And part of that conversation, I think, is going to be about maybe why that movie didn't land as well as it maybe could have. based on an Agatha Christie book, which is, that's a big deal. Agatha Christie is one of the most popular authors in the history of mankind, by the way, based on the number of books that she sold. And but that movie, I don't know, it wasn't my favorite, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that on Tuesday. So subscribe to the show on YouTube or on your preferred podcast provider. Episodes are published to the podcast feed right after I finish recording them on YouTube. So I'm going to literally go publish this episode right to the podcast feed. You can listen to it over there. Leave us a comment and let you know what you thought about Moon Knight, episode 1 or episode 2 now. And I'll try and read those comments on the next show. Thanks for joining in, and we will see you on Tuesday.